Good morning. I'm JANEY, Mayor of Boston. Welcome to Casa Myrna's 12th annual Community of Conscience Brunch. The theme this year is Strength in Community, an idea that resonates with me, especially after our experiences during the past year. I've been consistently moved by the dedication and passion of so many people that have stepped up to help during this challenging time. The pandemic has been especially difficult for people experiencing domestic violence at home on lockdown with their abusers. This issue is deeply personal for me as a survivor of domestic violence. That is why I'm so grateful for organizations like Casa Myrna. Casa Myrna was one of the many recipient organizations that received funding support to address the crisis through the City of Boston's Resiliency Fund. Together, the City of Boston and partners like Casa Myrna have worked to address the needs of the most vulnerable among us. We have created many partnerships and learned valuable lessons that we will take with us as we work toward a safer and more equitable recovery. Our work is not done as we grapple with the horrific double stabbing that occurred in Dorchester this weekend, leaving 2 children traumatized. Let's continue to work together to reduce all kinds of violence in our city. Let's aim to offer enough shelter beds for the survivors who need them. These are challenging problems, but critically important. I'm depending on the strength and the passion of our community and the good work of Casa Myrna to achieve these goals. Thank you very much. I am deeply, deeply grateful for all that you do.
Thank you, Mayor JANEY. On behalf of all of us at Casa Myrna, good morning and thank you for attending Casa Myrna 12th Annual Community of Conscience First Ever Virtual Brunch. We're so excited to have you here today for what we know is going to be a wonderful program. I want to thank all of you for giving your Saturday morning up to celebrate with us. And I would like to introduce myself. My name is Cesia Sanchez, and I'm the Director of the Housing Programs at Casa Myrna, and I will be with you all through this event. We all have a lot to celebrate in making it through this crazy year. During this past year at Casa Myrna, more than ever before, we have realized the importance of working together with the whole community to help survivors of domestic violence and their families. Strength in community is the theme of this event this year. We have selected this theme because so many people in our community stepped up this year to provide donations, emergency supplies, and support for both staff and survivors, and we're so grateful to all of you. Now, let's go to our program. We have a dynamic program for you this morning, packed with presentations from a few of our friends who are community heroes. At the end of the program, about 11:45, we will all transition into social networking tables and share some quality time together. Now, it is my true honor to introduce to you my hero, Casa Myrna Chief Executive Director, Stephanie Brown.
Thank you, Cesia and Mayor JANEY. Good morning and welcome to our new event format. My address this morning is quite different from what I'd planned last week. Many of you may have heard of the recent tragedy in the Casa Myrna family. Our sister, Jahaira DeAlto, was killed in a double homicide in Dorchester last Sunday. Jahaira and Fatima Yassin were allegedly killed by Fatima's husband. Jahaira was a Casa Myrna SafeLink hotline advocate and a much-loved advocate for trans rights. Not just a job, she considered her work at SafeLink as fulfilling her calling to help others. She was a leader in the trans community and a surrogate mother to queer youth. Since tomorrow is Mother's Day, I'd like you to hear the words she shared with the world last Mother's Day. I am the mother who raised the children whose rainbow sparkled too brightly and blinded their birth moms. I cherished what they discarded. I took on earthly assignments for the moms who'd earned their heavenly reward. For their babies who still needed raising, I did that. And I'm still doing that. And I'll keep doing that because I will never know what seeing my DNA reflected in another's eyes could look like. But I know what gratitude in the eyes of a young person who finally feels seen looks like. And for me, that's enough. Our hearts ache for her family and friends. As one of her closest friends said, she deserved an ending filled with kindness and tenderness. Her death is a great loss to the LGBTQIA community and all survivors of domestic and sexual violence. So please join me in a moment of silence to recognize Jahira, Fatima, and others we have lost this year to both domestic violence and to COVID. Thank you. Jahira's murder reminds us that tragedy and domestic violence touch us all. Violence is entrenched deeply in our communities, and it will continue until we create a cultural shift in our attitudes toward gender identity, race, sexual orientation, power, and violence. We can only be successful in ending intersections of oppression by addressing them together, in community, with each other. If you know me, you probably know I'm an optimist. I believe that as much work as we have to do to ensure every relationship is safe and healthy, we also have much to celebrate. Even in the face of unspeakable tragedy and the violence that surrounds our work every day, I believe that we can be better, that we can be there for each other, and that we can end abuse and oppression. As we all know, without exception, this past year has been rough for all of us. It's been especially difficult for survivors of domestic violence. Public health guidance has said that to keep ourselves safe, we needed to stay home and exercise distance from each other. Essentially, we needed to isolate ourselves. But for survivors of domestic violence, isolation is a hallmark of abuse, and home is not safe. We've seen survivors crippled by job loss, facing homelessness due to their inability to pay rent, unable to afford food and household supplies. Abuse and violence has increased exponentially over the last year. And yet, here's why, in the face of all of this unfathomable pain, I remain optimistic. Our community has come together to support survivors on a level I've never before experienced. And honestly, I'm not sure I could have dreamed it either. You made so much possible this year. Everyone stepped up to support survivors. You showed up today. Look, I know you have things to do on a Saturday morning and you're not here for the breakfast basket, but you continue to show up for survivors. And for that, you have my deepest thanks. The legislature, the city, and the state prioritized increased funding for domestic violence services and staffing, for the expansion of emergency shelter, for homelessness prevention, and for permanent housing. The Lieutenant Governor and the Attorney General conducted outreach campaigns to make people aware that SafeLink, our statewide domestic violence hotline, was open and ready to help. Our Secretary of State re-released our public service announcement on the address confidentiality program. Congress passed the CARES Act that provided vital supports for people living on the edge and protecting workers through the pandemic. District Attorney Rollins and Sheriff Tompkins, both of whom are here with us today, serve as thought leaders on how the criminal legal system can work better for survivors. So a big, big thanks to our government partners. Many of them are here with us in the room today, so I just want to thank them for being here. From our state Senate, Senators Nick Collin, Sal DiDomenico, and Michael Rush. Our representatives, Robert Consalvo, Brandy Fluker Oakley, Kevin Honan, Jay Livingstone, Liz Miranda, and Michael Moran. We also have representatives from Rep. Tyler's office, Shireen O'Borg, from Rep. Chan's office, Maeve Kidney, and from Rep. Decker's office, Sarah Nordberg and Kathleen Hornby. We also have Boston City councilors here, Ricardo Arroyo, Frank Baker, Andrea Campbell, Anissa Asabi George, Ed Flynn, and Michelle Wu. We're also joined by Maria Cheevers from the Boston Police Department, Alexandra Valdez from the Boston Office on Women's Advancement, Maria Mosaitis, who is the child advocate in the Office of the Child Advocate, and Lynn Tordo from the Interagency Council on Housing and Homelessness, and Liam Lowney from the Mass Office for Victim Assistance. So who else do I have to thank? A lot. So foundations, corporations, individuals, they funded what the government could not. We were able to record a record number of survivors with your gifts. So what were we able to do with all that support? You're probably wondering. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been able to expand emergency shelter for dozens more families than we've ever done in the past. We've been able to provide rental support to prevent the homelessness of nearly 250 families. And we've been able to provide over 400 families with food and resources for emergency supplies. And at the same time, keep all of our staff employed with not one layoff or reduction in staff hours. In fact, we were able, with government resources, to pay double time for staff who were working in the shelters because our shelters are 24/7 and folks have to be on site. And so, I want to thank our board and my colleagues on staff. Our board supported and strategized with all of us while serving as consummate cheerleaders for us. Our staff continue to show up for survivors day in and day out, despite the personal hardships they faced with COVID. A special thanks to our Brunch host committee and our Brunch lead sponsors, the Allen Family Foundation, the Cambridge Trust Charitable Foundation, and the United Way of Massachusetts Bay and Merrimack Valley. And finally, I want to wish a happy Mother's Day to all the mothers, the grandmothers, the aunties, and all of you who put other people before yourselves. On a personal note, I want to give a shout out to the 3 mothers in my life who are here with us today. My mother, Liz, my sister, Christine, and my mother-in-law, Alicia. So I love you all. Thank you all again for not just joining us this morning, but for standing with us, for doing your part to create a world in which all relationships are safe and healthy. You feed my optimism and you give me hope. So thank you. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our friend and champion, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Hello, Casa, Myrna. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you today, and thank you for all that you do to support the survivors of domestic violence. It takes courage to discuss domestic violence, and through your important work, you give voice to survivors all across our Commonwealth. The Casa Myrna team understands the needs of women and children as they're working to build a new life, and that means providing high-quality housing assistance, job training, and legal resources. The services you provide are especially critical during this crisis, when people are experiencing sexual and domestic violence are now at increased risk. So I'll continue using my position in the United States Senate to help end sexual violence and to support survivors. I am deeply grateful for the role that this organization plays in the fight for a better world for women. We're going to keep standing shoulder to shoulder in the years ahead. This is a righteous fight, and we will stay in it together.
Thank you, Senator Warren. It is now my honor and pleasure to introduce a longtime friend of Casa Myrna and one of the most devoted supporters, Maura Healey. For many years, the Attorney General Office, under Maura leadership, has provided funding support for our work, and Maura herself has visited our shelter to talk with survivors about resiliency and hope. I am delighted to introduce Maura Healey.
Good morning. I'm so glad to be joining you today for the Community of Conscience virtual brunch. I want to thank Stephanie Brown and everyone at Casa Myrna, and I want to recognize you for the amazing work you do to provide survivors of domestic violence with the tools to escape and recover from the trauma of abuse and to begin to rebuild their lives. You are a group that has inspired me for years, and I'm so proud to be with you here this morning. We know that COVID-19 has had a desperate impact. I say desperate impact, also a disparate impact on some of the most vulnerable among us. This includes survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And it's more important than ever that these folks have the resources and the support that they need. These people may be spending more time at home with their abuser, under increased stress and pressure, and isolated from their usual support systems. Social isolation has made it difficult for many survivors to find the right opportunity to safely reach out for help. Now, thankfully, there's this incredible community of support in Massachusetts and Casa Myrna has been leading the way. Together, you've worked to make sure victims know they are not alone. And I know this work has been even more difficult as it's been more urgent in the time of COVID-19. Now, during the height of the pandemic, my office launched an information campaign because we were concerned about what might be happening out there for survivors and victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. We knew that organizations and teams at Casa Myrna were working so hard. We wanted to make sure that people knew that those resources were available and to remind them that help is available whenever they're ready. So we created a dedicated webpage compiling these resources, and we partnered with the Massachusetts Office of Victim Assistance to create and distribute multilingual resource flyers across the state. We worked with the business community to put these flyers up where survivors could see them, mostly in essential businesses, laundromats, grocery stores that remained open through this crisis. We understand the importance, as Casa Myrna always has, of getting this information to survivors where they are and where they're able to access it, often where they're alone, away from those who abuse them during normal everyday routines. That's why we teamed up in the way that we did to work with you to get this important information out. And I'm also working with a group of attorneys generals from around the country, pushing Congress for more federal funding to assist victims of crime. Every single attorney general in this country has joined in that call on Congress. Before I close, I do want to thank and acknowledge the Victim Services Division and the Victim Compensation Division in my office. They're the ones behind the work that's done out of my office, and I want to thank them for their compassion. We know there is so much more work to do. Raising awareness is a key component. But I want to tell you all this morning, though I wish we were together, and soon we will be. In this virtual moment, I want to tell you that, first of all, I am grateful for everything that you do to support Casa Myrna. I want to thank the staff and the leadership of Casa Myrna, and I want to assure you that my office will continue to look to partner with you to support survivors and victims in any way possible. This has been a year where so many have been tested. It's also been a year of incredible resilience and coming together. And I want that positive energy to continue to fuel us as we recognize that things have gotten worse for so many. There's also an opportunity to work together to make things so much better. Thank you for all you do, and thank you, Team Casa Myrna, for doing the work.
Thank you, Maura. Our next speaker is the Massachusetts Secretary of State, William Galvin. Secretary Galvin had been a longtime friend of Casa Myrna, a defender of vulnerable people in our state. It is my pleasure to introduce Secretary Galvin.
It's really a pleasure and an honor to be a participant today in Casa Myrna's celebration. I've had the pleasure of working closely with Casa Myrna and other providers and advocates in the area of domestic violence now for many years. I'd like to believe our collaboration has resulted in opportunities to rid ourselves of this terrible curse of domestic violence. I'm very proud of the effort that my office has made to allow people to relocate and rebuild their lives. Having said that, the current time and the time we're just leaving, the time of the pandemic, has been an extremely difficult experience for many victims of domestic violence. The isolation that was required of all of us has made it much more difficult for those who found themselves in these very difficult circumstances, and it's made them much more vulnerable. In fact, my office has received a dramatic increase in calls over the last several months as we went through this period. For those reasons, it's extremely important that we continue our effort together. I believe that we have to continue to make sure that the cause of domestic violence is something that never leaves our mind, because unfortunately domestic violence does not leave our society. Year in and year out, we're confronted with the same issue. This is a priority. We have to continue to make it a priority. I hope to continue working with you and your organization and others to improve the circumstances of those victims. I look forward to having this opportunity in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Galvin. Our next speaker, Ayanna Pressley, is one of the most powerful leaders to ever represent Boston. She is a history-making former Boston City Council and currently our U.S. Representative of the 7th District. I am very proud to introduce Casa Myrna's dear friend, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley.
Good morning, everyone. I so wish that we were all together physically in community, but I'm glad that we can at least sit at this virtual table together and break bread. A special thank you to Stephanie Brown, my sister in service. I'm so grateful for your leadership. I'm grateful for all that you do to create safe spaces, to create healing spaces. Thank you for advocating for survivors. Thank you for leading us. Thank you to the dedicated community that is Casa Myrna, and thank you to the board as well. I know this is a working board, one that works, that is relentless in this work and brings great compassion to it. And so I thank you for that. And you know, what all of you are doing to raise awareness, to protect and to support survivors of domestic violence is critical, especially in the wake of this pandemic. As you all know, as COVID cases have surged and stay-at-home orders were implemented, so too did the number of cases of intimate partner violence. This past year has been an extraordinarily difficult time for our families and our communities. Many have been forced to quarantine in spaces that are unsafe. Casa Myrna's work has never been more essential. What you have provided through your advocacy, your resources, the safe space, the dignity that you create, the humanity that you affirm has been nothing short of a lifeline and a blessing. For the many who are experiencing unprecedented hurt in the midst of these unprecedented circumstances, and in spite of extremely difficult times, you have showed up and you have labored in love, and you have found creative ways to support and to care for some of the most vulnerable in our community. We're all connected. Our shared experiences bind us, our freedoms and our destinies are tied, and it is our commitment to serving one another and standing with each other that makes us strong. Please know that as your Congresswoman, you can always count on me to be your sister in solidarity, to uplift your stories, and to legislate in close partnership with you in direct response to the hurt. That's why I was so encouraged to see my amendment last month to support LGBTQ+ survivors of domestic violence included in the Violence Against Women Act, which passed the House. As I've always said, the people closest to the pain must be closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. Casa Myrna, I thank you. I thank you for the work that you do every day to protect and to meet the needs of survivors of domestic violence. I look forward to our continued partnership to see budgets and policies passed, which center the dignity and the humanity of survivors everywhere.
Thank you, Ayanna. Our next performer is a local celebrity, a poet, a songwriter, an author, and educator. He has performed, taught, and lectured at schools, universities, theaters around the country. He is also a former National Poetry Slam individual champion and was selected one of the Chicago Tribune's Artist of the Year for excellence in poetry. Welcome, Regie Gibson.
Hello, my name is Regie Gibson, and I am a literary performer as well as an educator, and I am so honored to have been invited to be part of this event. And I think the theme is so appropriate. Strength in community. Domestic violence prevention begins with each of us, because it does all start with each of us. We have to ask ourselves, what can we do to make someone's lives better, to bring someone into a more peaceful space? And for decades now, Casa Myrna has been doing exactly that. And as I thought about the name Myrna, I began to look it up and see what is the etymology of it. And I noticed that there were several spellings of that name in multiple cultures. And they all had a very, very powerful meaning. Some meant healing. Some meant peace. Some meant tender. And when I saw those meanings of the name Myrna, I thought, yes, yes. It brought me into the mind of Mahatma Gandhi. He had a philosophy called Satyagraha, and that was two Sanskrit words brought together, Satya and Agraha, which meant holding firmly to truth and holding firmly to love. And that Satyagraha philosophy was adopted by another man of peace, Martin Luther King, which he carried forward into his mission to bring America to a more peaceful, healing, and tender place. And so to that, I offer in that spirit this, Satyagraha. Away from salt, slow burning the eyes, away from bullets that shatter our children, away from what ashen's truth with its lies, away from the torturer's grin. Away, you mirrors that multiply violence, away, you swords that sharpen our breaths, away, you fears that Hitler us silent, away from the lockstep march toward death, away, you hands too practiced and willing to conjure up rage and machine gun storm, hands that brand our prophets with killing and sutures our futures to shadow and mourn, away from all in us that is pleading to make each human suffering its bed, away from all in us that is needing to grind human bones to make its bread. Satyagraha, 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 Satyagraha. Bring us toward the new opened eye. Bring us toward that balm that will heal us. Bring us toward the strength to deny anything threatening this oneness that fills us. Bring us toward the coming together. Bring us toward becoming awake. Bring us toward the truth. Come whatever it takes. Bring us toward hands practiced in sewing, spirits too injured to mend on their own, hands that can show us to our knowing that we are not alone. Bring us toward that space deep within us, that space of which all our wisdoms speak of. Bring us toward that urge that demands us to love, to love. Satyagraha, 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 Satyagraha. Thank you for listening. Go in peace, go in tenderness, go in healing.
Thank you, Regie. That was truly amazing. Our next speaker is a survivor of domestic violence, a mother, a friend, and one of our co-workers at Casa Myrna. Regie is here today to tell you her brave story of finding her long path to safety and independence.
Welcome, everyone. So incredibly honored and grateful for the opportunity to speak today. First, I'd like to recognize all survivors that have been forced into homelessness. You are heard, you're supported, and you are valued. I also would like to extend my infinite gratitude to those that have been involved in the process of me reclaiming my life. Your presence has made more of a difference than I can express. To begin, for most of my life, making choices was not something I knew was an option. As children, we don't get to make all that many options or, choices, right? But imagine for a minute, life happening all around you and being ignored, dragged along, or to blame for that chaos. As a child, my family moved frequently. We were never in a place longer than 2 years. I grew up with an older brother, just 1 year apart. We really relied on each other. Violent abuse and neglect were prevalent in our household. My father abused my mother regularly, and I remember often chasing behind at a young age to stop him from reaching her. That took a toll. Fast forward to late teens, I was 17, just received my GED and got a job. My father introduced me to the idea of joining the military. Being so young, both parents have to sign for your enlistment, so they did. About 1 year later, I met a man in my unit. Things moved rather quickly. He proposed about 4 months or so after we started dating, and then we got news our unit was to deploy. I found out about 3 weeks later I was pregnant. If you're pregnant, deployment is out of the question. I left a few weeks shy of my unit's departure, and it was decided now I would be his wife and a new mom. We had our baby girl, but our relationship ended pretty quickly due to his abuse. As I picked up the pieces of my life with my baby in tow, I grasped the idea that I will now be doing this on my own. He didn't call much, so we carried on. My daughter was 2 or so when I met someone new. He swept me off my feet. I just knew he was the one because he said he felt it too. After a month, things moved fast. He was staying over often, popping up at my job, calling me at all hours. I thought this meant he really cared and just wanted me to be safe. Soon to follow, I found out I was pregnant. Though he showed some signs of jealousy, I brushed it off and he convinced me to move in. I just knew at this point he's completely serious about us. Why else would he ask me to move in? He said this will help me save money. He's just looking out. Things were actually really, really great, but not for long. I went through a cycle of physical, emotional, financial, and sexual abuse with him 7 times before I was really done. And they say statistically it can take a victim an average of 7 times before they leave. Why is that? Why does she go back? Well, he proposed, he apologized every time, and blamed his childhood. That's why. And having experienced violence early in life, I learned that somehow my brain wired itself to believe I can heal an abuser. If I just do this or do that or love him a little more, he'll stop. He won't do it again. There's no way it can get worse. But it does, and it did. Right before my final exit, I attended a funeral out of town. I would be gone no longer than a week, and he was to keep the baby. Upon my return, he refused access. She was 9 months old and hidden from me for 5 weeks. During that time, I called police stations, did well child checks. I tried what seemed like everything. They all told me there's nothing we can do. He even showed officers some form of false legal documents, and the police told me to cease contacting them about this. Nobody would help me find my baby. I almost gave up until I went to the courthouse and they found there was no orders in the system. That night, I was able to locate her. I got a U-Haul, packed up everything I could, and left. We were going to start fresh, a few hours away, and never look back. Not so much. A couple weeks later, while the girls and I were at a friend's, the one we shall not name, arrived at a family member's home with court documents demanding I bring our daughter. Since there were false documents before, there was no way I believed that. Frighteningly, he found where my friends lived, family members, and went door to door all hours of the night. This led me to seeking a domestic violence shelter. I was terrified. Apparently, the documents he had were real, and we were ordered to show at court. While our daughter was less than 1 year old until about 3.5, a judge ordered shared custody week on, week off. Her health seemed to decline after visits with her father, hospital visits due to incidents of dehydration, thrush, severe diaper rash, some bruising, but the judge ordered no change in custody. When we began exchanging from her daycare center, that is when the stalking and intimidation became severe. He found where I lived, vandalized my car on several occasions. He would find me at restaurants, had me attacked and robbed, and I would move from roommates to new apartments to safe houses, all before my oldest made it to 1st grade. It was brutal, but no one would listen, and he never stopped. I knew I hit my breaking point for the last time when he pushed her toward the exchange. He pushed her hard enough to the point she almost fell. We didn't go home that night. I just was tired, afraid, and done. I thought, go to the police? No, they dismissed me too many times already. DCF? No, they rejected my concerns, stating there just wasn't enough evidence. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. I was alone. He knew where I lived, where my family lived, where my friends lived, where I worked, where my daughter's schools were. I made the decision to go to another domestic violence shelter, forced back into homelessness while I solidified my exit strategy. While at this shelter, I met a woman who was in her late 40s. She was on the run herself, but from a place called Roxbury, Massachusetts. After sharing my story, she mentioned, why don't you go to Boston? It's beautiful, and I bet you could really find some help there. I started my research and came to a decision I called SafeLink, Massachusetts statewide domestic violence hotline. The operator on the other end said, all shelters are full, but call every day, morning and night. That is when we do our updates. So I did for 3 weeks. I finally got a call from a place named Casa Myrna. They did an intake and told me they'll be back in touch. I got a call the next day welcoming me as long as I got there by next Friday. We came up with a plan. In 5 days, I got everything in order to drive us across the country in my little 4-door Chevy Malibu and my 2 littles secured safely in the back. We were off. And as frightening as it may sound, it was liberating at the same time. I got to choose. Despite what everyone was telling me or dismissing, I made it an adventure for us. It took 3 days, but we made it. And I had no clue what to expect. I knew nothing about Boston. But within 7 months, I fixed my credit, went through therapy, connected with the VA, and found a home in an incredible school district. I realized this powerful woman has been here all along. I just needed someone on my path to show me. And that's what Casa Myrna's staff have done and continue to do for others, fortunately, due to the people who believe in their movement. My mission now is to create a world where being a woman is not an obstacle. I want to give survivors the hope that it is possible to thrive after years of loss and feelings of despair. I hope today, what you took from my story wasn't just a woman scorned or a victim to her circumstances, but a message that so many people were given an opportunity to respond. And each entity, whether it was the justice system, healthcare, education system, social services, every person I asked to help me had a choice. You who are listening, you have an opportunity to respond and make a choice. No matter how long or seemingly impossible, you get to choose. And when we collectively make a choice for the good of our people, that's when we find what we're truly made of. Thank you.
What an amazing story. Thank you very much, Rachel, for sharing your story and inspiring us today. Can you imagine the courage that it took for her to sacrifice everything to be an independent, self-sufficient woman? I know we will all be hearing your name again as you take on even greater challenges. And just like Rachel, there are so many survivors that we see every single day trying to find a safe place to go. You have now heard Rachel's struggles to come all the way across the country to Casa Myrna to find a safety for her family. A first-hand account of how critical Casa Myrna is to so many survivors who have nowhere else to turn. As I said earlier, we have been able to meet the challenges of the past year only because of the support we receive from all of you and the community. The money we raise for this event provide the resources we need to shelter survivors and children, help families find safe, affordable housing, and live a life without fear. Now it is the time to give. I am excited to tell you that our virtual brunch have already set a record of 120,000. There is so many of us here. Can we make it to 140? Please make your donation now. If everyone here today donate 150, we will reach our goal. Are you ready to do this? Just 150, and we'll be able to reach our goal. It is easy to donate. Just look to the upper right corner of the screen and find the donate button. Click it and fill in your information. That is all there is to it. The donation tracker at the top of your screen will tell you how close we are to our goal. Now, while you're making your contribution, I want to tell you what comes next. We are all going to move into our networking portion of the event, and we hope you will join us. It is super easy to get connected. There are just 3 steps. First, click the Start Mingling, verify your name, and then click Ready. You will see all the tables. Locate the table you want to join and click the orange check mark to join in. Casa Myrna staff will be mingling at various tables, so please say hello. And if you have special questions about our legal, community-based housing services, you can find our staff experts, Catherine, Camila, and Jessica at their own table to greet you, address your questions, and share our stories. It was wonderful to be with you today. Many thanks to all of our representatives, and a special thank to JANEY for making this so easy for us. And a special thank you to everyone here for always support the Casa Myrna community. It was my pleasure being here with you today. Please be safe, enjoy your weekend. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.